So I'm going to be showing you how to use cinematic framing and architectural storytelling to present your architecture projects. This is extremely effective for architectural thesis or really large-scale architectural projects, especially in those universities that have a lot of tutors that are really focused on theory and design-based things. I think setting up your project with a huge narrative and storytelling around it can really transform the way people perceive your project. So if you actually haven't started designing yet, or you're just at the beginning of your project, what you want to do is take whatever brief you have, whatever idea you have, and just turn it into a narrative. Something that you'll be able to tell as a story. You know, ideally, before you even start designing, you want to think about your narrative. How will I tell this story? What are the key points of the story that I want to show people? And a big secret that I discovered that I've always used through all of my projects was to create a false perception to people that your project is way bigger and way more diverse than it actually is. You do this by choosing key moments that you want to show, and then you only design in detail within each of those moments. I'm going to use my existing thesis as an example. So we'll hop into this project. Alright, so first of all, my apologies if you can hear the fan of my laptop in the background. It's running about 100 degrees with this project open. That should be fine. So I'll be using my architectural thesis as the example for this. However, I've used it on a lot of projects I've done. Now the big thing was this: before I even designed this space or even started thinking about it, I had my site and I marked out each part of the journey before I even began. So ideally, I'll show you my site plan I have here. I separated this into 3 acts. Now, you know, every story has a story arc of the introduction, the big build up to some big reveal, and then act 3, and then you got a conclusion. So I separated my narrative into these 3 acts. Now, I actually had a full video walkthrough of my thesis. In my previous projects, I just had simple pin-up pictures. So this kind of storytelling narrative approach can work for either a video walkthrough or just images. Either way, you're presenting your project as a story and as a narrative that you want to take people into. You want people to become invested in your narrative for that. However long you're presenting for, say it's 10 minutes, you want people to be invested for at least of those 10 minutes fully in your project and immersed in the world that you've built. So my site was this massive street in part of the city. Now, I created the illusion that this design was spread out throughout the whole entire city. But you'll see here, it's much like a video game design. I've only detailed and designed the actual scenes that you'll see. So a lot of the camera placement was down here. You see outside of where the camera was, there's absolutely nothing. It's just blocks and a bunch of random assets that you only see within each of the camera views. You'll see on my site plan here, I've marked out Act 1 and the intro. So I'll take you through briefly how your narrative should play out, and then we'll go into specific camera angles and camera setup settings. Also, these camera settings are universal throughout all architectural rendering software. At the moment, I'm using Unreal Engine, but I've used this in Rhino and V-Ray. You can use it in Cinema 4D, Blender, anything. Camera settings are universal throughout architecture software or just any 3D software really. All you need is the camera, the lens length, and maybe focal length and whatnot. So my Act 1 shot was at the beginning of the street right here, and I used a wide angle establishing shot. So I knew before I even started designing that the opening scene of this would be at the end of the street and you see the entire design all the way through. Now, this is where you have to put the most detail, and this is the most time-consuming part of your project because, so I'm saying you only detail things that you see in the camera view, right? But since this is an establishing shot of the whole site, technically you're seeing the whole site, so you're gonna have to detail a lot. But a few tricks I used here, because my site is a simple narrow street, yours might be a massive open land. The trick is, if you're using a wide angle shot, you're only going to see things that are quite close. Things that are in the distance don't need to have a huge amount of detail. So we'll go more into this when I get into the wide angle views, but say this is your first shot, big establishing a wide angle. They have laid out a narrative. The narrative is that you're walking through here and you got little moments of detail. So my thesis was really focused around virtual reality, visualized data and blockchains, all that kind of thing. And so I just had these little moments throughout the site where I would highly detail these aspects that I'm trying to show. So you see there's a lot of detail put into this one little figure thing that I had. Just chug it onto lit so you can see it a bit better. But then you see this alleyway, completely empty, not detailed because you don't see it at all. So I don't even bother to model anything within this. I'll show you how to set up your cameras so that you avoid these kind of things. And we have this shot, which I have a lot of detail in, and all my shots only showed with inside this little shot that I had. You see, as soon as we turn somewhere else, like another shot that I didn't show, there's no detail in this whatsoever other than what you see from the outside. So Act 1 was at the beginning of the street. Big establishing shot, show everyone, this is my street, this is my design, all this stuff is going on, got crazy amounts of things going on over here and here. So that's the introduction to our narrative. Then we take us through, I show you these little moments on the side. Say you got your introduction, and I say 2 or 3 moments leading to Act 2. Act 2 was inside this shop, because this was a second part of my thesis that I wanted to show. So Act 1, introduction, few moments. Act 2, this is kind of my secondary thing I was trying to show. I'm not going to go into detail with my thesis, but it's a virtual store essentially. Then Act 2 brings you into this gateway. So I had this moment where you come in, you walk down these stairs, imagining your story on a big bell curve. This is kind of the anticipation going up and leading kind of deeper into your site. So this was essentially Act 2, which was underground. You see, I've made this highly detailed one underground store, but I designed this entire thing keeping in mind that my only camera angle was going to be from down the corner on the left here. So this place only really looks good and effective from underneath, from this specific shot. If you were to travel over to, say, the right side, kind of starts breaking a bit, it doesn't make much sense. So before I even start designing each moment, I knew where the camera would be. I knew where the camera would be facing. That way when I design, I can just keep that in mind, and that saves a lot of time, especially for architecture students. You know, you want to save as much time as possible and be as efficient as possible. Also, something really smart that creates the illusion of a lot of detail, which I've done here. It's because my site was above ground and below ground. I managed to put in, I've got a bit too many layers on here, so I'll just show you the final image I used of this area. You can see I've linked the top of the site to the bottom, so it creates that illusion that, whoa, this whole site has been detailed from the top all the way to underground, and it keeps that perception that the whole entire site has been detailed and thought out, but really, there's not much detail outside of this, only within this shot that you can see. Then Act 2, I've taken you through a passageway, which is traveling through, and then another little moment. So I usually have Act 1, and then a couple of key moments you want to show. Then Act 2, another establishing shot, and then more key moments. So between Act 2 and Act 3, I have another few key moments that you just want to show. So you come through here, there's another few key moments. Then you continue traveling down this hallway to Act 3. So it takes you to this where I had a huge, big revealing shot. So this will vary depending on your own project, but I really split it into Act 1. Intro, Act 2, big anticipation, taking people into your world, showing them the journey, and then Act 3 was your big reveal, big exciting things happening shot, and then a conclusion. And that's how I separated my project into a real storytelling narrative. So what you can take away from this is get your site plan, where your design is going to be, mark out where's Act 1 going to be, where's Act 2 going to be, where's Act 3 going to be, and then choose a few moments in between each of those acts and place your cameras where you want to show. So say if you have a whole village design, choose one place in that village and just show within those camera parameters what will you see within that, and then only focus your design on that part that the camera will be seeing. So I've seen so many people waste a lot of time, you know, they're trying to, if they have a whole village to show, they're trying to detail every single building. Oh, what's this? Half of it won't matter. As long as you only detail what you're seeing, that's all that matters. Once you've decided your overall narrative and your journey, how you're going to tell the story, we want to figure out which cameras are we going to use. So I'm going to be showing you with Unreal Engine, but again, you can use, you know, whatever software you're using. This should be the same because you're using cameras. So I usually do it in 16:9. However, you want to keep in mind, depending if you want to post this onto social media or not, I usually have a letterbox mask and I set one up to 9:16. This is with Unreal Engine, depends on what you're using, not sure if we'll have this. But I set up my shots like this, so you have the phone perspective and then the computer perspective, because however you want to show your project might be on Instagram, might be through a YouTube video. Not everyone's gonna wanna watch a YouTube video. Just keep that in mind before you set up your shots if you want to mask out different aspect ratios. And remember, I also just did a 1:1 as well. before you set up each of your shots. Yeah, just keep that in mind. But are we turning this off for now? I usually set up the 3x3 grid. You want to use those basic cinematic rules of rule of thirds, mise-en-scene. You don't have to be an expert in it. Just what I like to do actually was I watched a movie that I was really, into or draw a lot of inspiration from, and it makes it, exciting, and it gives you a lot of inspiration. So you can almost copy scenes from a movie that you're into, or a movie that will like really relate to your project. Not necessary, but it kind of helps sometimes. On our site plan, we'll go to our establishing shot where it was going to be. So our opening scene was with a wide angle view. Half of the building's missing for some reason, but it's fine. So as I say, camera settings are universal throughout all 3D visualization software. You should have access to a camera and lens settings. So the trick with this is you don't want to do too many wide angle establishing shots. Essentially, you only really need one for each act, or even just one for the first establishing shot. So your camera's focal length, generally I do 15 millimeters for wide angle establishing shots. Anything less is gonna be like too fisheye and show too much, but you can do less than 15 if you want that real fisheye establishing shot. But you can see it's almost too big that if you haven't extremely highly detailed everything, it will kind of spread everything out and make it look a lot more unpopulated than it actually is. So you want to find that medium. You don't want to be too zoomed in, but you don't want to be zoomed too far out either. So I think 15 millimeters is usually pretty good for these wide angle establishing shots. Usually you want to do shots around eye level, but for this one, since it's an establishing shot, you want to get it as high as you can. You see, if I put it too high, it starts breaking the illusion, and you can see on top of these buildings I haven't detailed it, and I'm not going to detail it because that would take way too much time to detail all of these surrounding buildings. So I had this shot as high as it can go. Now you're setting the scene. So once you've set this camera, you can use rule of thirds. I mean, you don't want it to be angled like this because this kind of makes it look awkward. However, if you did detail it around these areas, then it would be effective. So you kind of just want to set blocks out. What I always do was design my scene in a real basic block setting. This is a very common technique with like 3D digital cinematography people. They block out the scene. So if you have 5 buildings in your scene, just create simple blocks of your design, or a real minimalistic version of your design. Just place it out and then just zoom your camera around and just see what angles look good. Like this could look neat with this foreground, midground and background thing going on. You hear that a lot, like put something in the foreground, in this instance a tree, and then midground is your subject, and then background you've got the buildings over there. But generally for your establishing shot, I like to just have everything in the background, because you're establishing, this is my design, this is the scene, you're setting it. Then later on you can do this kind of advanced foreground, midground, background shots. So what I did, I kind of set where people's eyes should be drawn to in the middle, and this was kind of my introduction shot. I did this in the daytime, but also I'd recommend if you're doing an architectural project or like a thesis or something, don't show daytime and nighttime. I spent a lot of time doing that in my project, trying to show this is it during the day, this is it transitioning to nighttime. I think that was a huge waste of time. Doesn't matter, just choose either day or night and keep it like that. And don't try to show too many times a day as like, dusk, dawn, and unless it's a key part of your design, I wouldn't worry about it because it just takes up a lot of time. So once you've established that wide angle shot, I place the camera here. You set the camera, you save it, and that's when you start designing everything that you see in this. So where your camera's placed, you would probably end up having a couple of subjects that are quite close to buildings. So start detailing out those buildings. If you say you only see the corner of that building, just detail this corner and this corner and just leave this empty. Like, you're not gonna see it, so don't worry. Then things that are way off in the distance in the background, just put the minimal amount of detail. So you'll see here, I've got things that go all the way back beyond the street. We'll just put it to unlit. You see I have all these little moments throughout the street. Those first 2 moments are extremely detailed because we move the camera into that later. But at the end of the street over here, they have the absolute most minimum amount of detail. I literally just took the main assets, copied them, and just pasted them way out in the distance. I'll just show you. What I'm talking about is these things over here. You can see the amount of detail significantly reduces as I get closer. See, the end of the street is just completely empty almost, but when the camera is way back down there, you don't even see it. So keep that in mind when you're setting up your establishing shots. Then after you set your establishing shot, that's when you want to highlight those key critical moments that lead to your act 2. So when I was setting up these next shots, you use a much narrower lens. When I did this project, I was experimenting with like walking first person perspective, which I think kind of goofy, but might work for you. I think it kind of gives a bit of realism and immersion in your project to have these kind of handheld shots, but you don't want to overdo it because that would be really tacky. So up to you if you want to put in those first person shots. Now, so when I highlight these kind of moments, I use a much narrower lens. 35 millimeters is one of my favorite lenses to use. So there's a lot of people, it's a very common lens length, 35 millimeters. This is kind of like a midway close-up, I would say. And with this, you're able to set up like a foreground, midground, and background. So foregrounds, you have kind of I set up a shot almost like this. I'll show you the actual shot here. So you see we've got something in the foreground. I use focal length settings, which is essentially just turning your aperture up or down and setting your camera focus distance away. It's a very common thing used in a lot of film and, you know, basic cinematography things where you have something blurry in the front, you know, makes it look cool, very film-like, I don't know. Then in the mid of the shot is the subject, which is your midground, and either blurred out or within focus, your background, which kind of, you want to set up your background so you can kind of see a bit of detail in the scene. If you have your background is low detailed, people will see like, oh, I see that. They haven't detailed that over there, so clearly it kind of ruins the immersion of your shot. So when you show each of these moments, you want to set up your camera, the foreground, the midground subject, and the background, and make sure the background that you're showing has a bit of detail in it at least. Creates that perception of, whoa, this guy has detailed the entire street. I can see everything to the background. So I had moment 1 there. And then I had moment 2, which was this one. I think I used a slightly wider lens when I did this. I think I had 25. Sometimes you can reduce your lens length if you're looking up and it kind of hides the detail around. See, this is what it looked like in the project, but if you move the camera down, you'll see there's not much detail around it. So you need to kind of pick those moments carefully. Also, you don't want to use too many wide angle or even medium angle shots. Like I would not put in any more than like 2 or 3 15mm shots or even 20 or 25mm. I usually like keeping it the minimum at 35mm with lots of high detail close-ups throughout your journey rather than a lot of wide angle shots, because if you have too many wide angle, too many medium angle, it kind of gets boring. You're seeing the same thing over and over and each shot is not cinematically thought out or framed. So I like to keep it 35 and above. And then I had a few shots going higher, about 50. And these are really like cinematic moments that you want to show with a lot of depth. I'm not sure I had too many of these, but you know, for shots like this, we really want to bring everything closer. You see you got this dude in the corner here, very cinematic looking because he's blurred out. You have a shot like this. This looks like a Sam the Gas render right now because you've got a blurry dude in the front, and then your mid shot is really highlighted, and then the background. You know, you use a bit of aperture and focal length for this. You blur out the guy. You set a manual focus distance. So this, and that creates a really cinematic looking shot using a 50mm lens. If you have a huge site that's even bigger than a city street, you can use 100 to 150mm, but I didn't actually use too many shots like this, but I think I should have. You can see it really creates this cinematic journey looking. Or that people, you know, if you set up a shot like this at 100mm, set your subject way off in the distance, you put a bunch of people in between that shot and it creates this kind of cinematic looking setup. I actually think I should have done a lot more of this because you can see now it's creating a lot of that depth perception and really creating that illusion that you've detailed out this entire thing. You can even go up to 150mm. You don't want to do too many of these 150mm shots because then it kind of gets almost sickening and confusing with all this crazy stuff going on. But if you just throw on like 1 or 2, you know, 1, 2 or 3 shots over 100mm, I think that will be really effective. So that was my act 1, which then took you into the shop. You had a little look around inside the shop. I think I had like 15mm with some 50mm close-ups, I think, because I was showing these products within the shop. And then we walked down into our act 2. So before I was talking about having those shots that link your entire site together. I had a camera angle that began up here and then panned down You'll see it here. And you want to kind of find these kind of interesting moments within your scenes to really add those in, and it creates a lot of interesting and a kind of almost experimental camera angles and shots. Don't want to overdo it. I think I only had one of these shots within my project, but I think it became a really crucial moment within my narrative, showing the link from the top to the bottom and how that design really works. You don't want to overdo it with that kind of thing, but I think having one or two moments like that within your scene, say you're in Act 2, and you look back on the hill and you see your Act 1 introduction where you were, and it kind of links the whole narrative together. Something which could be interesting if you keep it in mind. So you just use an array of wide angle, establishing, medium, and then lots of close-ups, lots of shots where you have foreground, midground, backgrounds, then a couple of these crazy experimental shots within it. I think it really creates a interesting and engaging narrative, which you don't want to overdo anything. You want to keep in mind whoever's watching your narrative probably doesn't have a very good attention span, so you want to keep their attention throughout the video and mix it up a lot. You don't want to do too many wide angle, too many of the same thing over and over. So I had Act 2 with a bunch of little moments within it, and then you come out through here to Act 3 where I had a very wide angle. This is where I used a 10mm to show everything. It's like a huge big reveal. The story arc was going up, and then you got the big reveal part showing the whole design of this big moment I've detailed out. You can see that even the building in the back wasn't actually that detailed, and all the surrounding had no detail within it either. Yeah, so that's kind of how I set up all my camera angles, and you really just want to take away the key thing of only detailing what you can see. Just remember, you set up the camera where the lens will show, set those up, set up all your key points within your project, then just detail out only what you see and link that with your overall site plan, and it will really create that illusion that your site is way more detailed than it actually is. So that's my guide on architectural cinematic framing and storytelling.